This 19th century book deals with diseased and healthy domestic animals. It's an easy-to-understand, practical guide based on experience. Foot and mouth disease is caused by an extremely contagious and very persistent infectious agent. The first symptom is a fever. After 1 or 2 days, fluid-filled vesicles appear on the mucous membrane of the mouth. Painful blisters also form between the toes of the feet, often filling the entire hoof cleft. Foot and mouth disease has been known for a long time. It's a much feared disease affecting cloven-hoofed animals. It occurs throughout the world. The infectious agent, a picornavirus, attacks cattle, pigs, sheep, and goats, as well as cloven-hoofed wild animals. Until 30 years ago, foot and mouth disease occurred regularly in Switzerland. The last proper outbreak passed through the country in the winter of 1965-66. At the time, the clinical signs of the disease were familiar to all veterinary surgeons, as well as to many livestock owners. The Burgdorf district was one of the regions affected by this epidemic. Dr. Heinrich Barth, a practicing veterinary surgeon in Burgdorf, recalls the outbreak. I was notified by the regional authority that we had foot and mouth disease in the Burgdorf district, and I was told which farms were affected. Interestingly, the outbreak started on a hill above Heimiswil. This is my mother. She experienced 2 outbreaks in 1938 and 1965. On Sunday evening, my husband noticed that the cows were not eating. He took a look at them and saw that their tongues were full of blisters. So he asked me to look at them too, because I had already experienced an outbreak, but he hadn't. I saw immediately that it was foot and mouth. The vet who was called out confirmed the suspicion of foot and mouth disease. The farm was immediately cordoned off, and a strict ban on movement was imposed. Nevertheless, the disease spread. Suspected cases were discovered on the Ziegelhof farm. On Sunday evening, you said they were not eating, and the calves were not drinking. In the morning, the vet arrived and said that we had foot and mouth. And on Tuesday, they came and collected the animals. To prevent a new epidemic, compulsory vaccination for cattle was introduced generally. Despite this measure, isolated outbreaks continued to occur. The last case in Switzerland appeared in the Emmental in 1980. It was a so-called breakthrough infection following vaccination. Heifers from elsewhere had been brought to spend the summer at this farm. They had been vaccinated a few days previously, but the prescribed quarantine period of 14 days following vaccination had not been adhered to. A few days after the cattle arrived, one of them became ill. Yes, that was a good 4 days afterwards. On Saturday, you saw that they weren't eating. The foam and the saliva were running out of their mouths. They were very ill. I called the vet immediately. I went there in the evening. The textbook symptoms were easily visible. The animals' heads were hanging. Saliva was pouring out of their mouths. When I opened their mouths, I could see the sores on their tongues and in their mouths, a clear indication of foot and mouth disease. Switzerland's Institute of Virology and Immunoprophylaxis, IVI. Highly contagious livestock diseases can be studied in the security wing here. The Institute has obtained a number of heifers to check the effectiveness of a certain vaccine batch against foot and mouth disease. Such vaccine tests are carried out in accordance with pharmacopoeia monographs. Dr. Lucas Bruckner, head of the Vaccine Control Department, is responsible for seeing that procedures are followed correctly. Working with extremely contagious microbes demands the highest possible biosecurity. This is level 4, which is designed to prevent any germs being spread to the environment. The cattle are taken through various airlocks to the heart of the facility, the animal wing, and are stabled there. 3 weeks earlier, they were vaccinated with various dosages of the vaccine to be tested. 2 heifers were not vaccinated. These 2 control animals are certain to become ill. Before inoculation of the virus, the animals are sedated with xylazine. The artificial infection takes place in the mucous membrane of the tongue at 2 points. Foot and mouth is a herd disease. Apparently, healthy animals display no symptoms, but can already have a raised temperature. The animals show all the symptoms of a severe, feverish, systemic illness: reluctance to eat, pain, and a temperature of over 40 degrees Celsius. The animals no longer behave normally. They lie down a great deal because their legs are painful. When they stand, they try to adopt a position that is free of pain by shifting their weight. They shuffle and fidget. Closer inspection reveals the first symptoms of foot and mouth disease: hair standing on end along the coronary band, with reddish areas underneath the hair. Reddish areas along the lateral edge of the coronary band. And a blister in the cleft of the hoof. These areas are extremely sensitive to pain. On careful inspection, such inconspicuous changes can also be found on a dirty hoof, even if the skin and hoof are pigmented. The animals also seem to ruminate normally. But the first vesicles or tiny blisters can already be found. These early lesions are not very obvious. The poor general state of health causes the livestock owner to call in the vet. This heifer is very ill and in considerable pain. Another animal has a raised respiratory rate, as in pneumonia. An early symptom that points to foot and mouth disease is this typical shuffling. It can already be observed in the early stages of the disease, even where the floor is more animal-friendly than in this experimental stable. Movements are slowed down and are associated with obvious pain. The overall posture is cramped. The position of the legs is abnormal. The fetlocks are pushed forward. This animal is knuckling at the fetlock joint. As the disease progresses, the animal's health seems to improve, and the body temperature often drops below 39 degrees Celsius. Increasingly, changes in the mouth and to the hooves dominate the clinical picture. In certain animals, close observation over an extended period will reveal increased salivation. Even at this early stage, the typical smacking of the mouth can be heard, although not very loudly. Many animals foam at the mouth when ruminating, and pools of saliva form on the floor of the stables. The animals develop an appetite again and try to eat, but are no longer able to transport food into their mouth with their tongue. Until the next feeding, the heifer with the brown head has found a way of taking in food. It eats like a dog by shoveling the pieces into its mouth. After feeding, salivation is especially intensive and the mouth smacking more easy to hear. It is obvious that the pain suffered by the animals is growing worse. To ease the burden on the hooves, this heifer positions its legs under its body and leans against the wall. Tongue movement here is too fast to detect vesicles. They have to be actively searched for. When trying to pull the tongue out of the mouth, the diseased skin inevitably tears. This is extremely painful for the animal. It is easy to see the blisters by simply looking into the mouth. The use of a mouth gag is very helpful. The animal suffers less pain and is quieter. It's easier to inspect the oral cavity. Now there are several blisters in various stages, mainly on the dorsal surface of the tongue, but also along its lateral border. As the disease progresses, vesicles appear everywhere in the mouth, on the palate, as well as on the lips and gums. Because of the increased salivation, such changes are not always easy to see. Small lesions can also be found around the nose and on the area between the nostrils and the mouth. Hooves are more accessible for examination. However, they are usually dirty. If the hoof is cleaned, changes can be found at an early stage. In the recumbent animal, examination is even easier, but detecting lesions is still difficult. On this leg, a blister is also found round the dew claw. During the further course of the disease, the changes to the mouth and feet become more evident. The animal is in severe pain. In this advanced stage, ruptured blisters can be found, as well as those that are full of fluid. By now, the diagnosis is clinically certain. The gray heifer on its way to being slaughtered. Immediately after it has been killed, the infected areas of the head and feet are carefully examined. Even a casual inspection reveals massive damage to all of the limbs. The true extent of the damage only becomes clear during the detailed examination. This blister on the right hind leg of the brown Swiss heifer was already noticed while the animal was still alive. This photograph was taken immediately before it went to be slaughtered. Manipulation of the foot shows that this animal was about to shed its hoof. On the left hind leg, the skin of the blister is torn, and the dew claw is also affected. This is the tongue of the same animal. The full extent of the damage is visible here. Blisters at every stage of development are apparent on this unpigmented tongue. At the tip, there are small vesicles filled with fluid. At the infection point, the blisters are already healing. Above it is a freshly burst aphtha with a jagged edge. In the dead animal, it's possible to see that there are lesions everywhere in the mouth. This heifer has foot and mouth disease. The first symptoms indicate a serious systemic illness, which seldom affects a single animal. Neighboring, apparently healthy animals can already have a raised temperature. Increased saliva flow and foaming at the mouth point to a painful process in the oral cavity. The animals try to adopt a position that minimizes their pain. This so-called shuffling is typical. A careful search quickly reveals the first changes on the feet. Increased sensitivity to touch is another indication. Already in this early stage, vast quantities of the virus are exuded. On inspection of the oral cavity, especially the tongue, it is necessary to search specifically for small blisters. To carry out this examination, a mouth gag is helpful. In addition to a feverish overall condition, large blisters on the tongue and hooves are sufficient for the clinical diagnosis of foot and mouth disease. To confirm the clinical diagnosis, suitable samples are brought immediately to the IVI. The Institute of Virology and Immunoprophylaxis is a reference laboratory for foot and mouth disease.